Hello, everybody.
Good evening. I hope everybody's well. Hope this is finding you well.
Tony, I really like your tapestry.
You
Is
like
that is
that?
that a tapestry there?
That is a something I got while I was in Thailand doing some leadership training and helping build a camp way back in almost at the beginning of Mosaic. It's been around for a little bit.
Yeah, that's super cool.
It's I like it a lot. I do.
I am having a couple technical things here. I'm excited for tonight. I think our conversation earlier was really neat, and I hope we can keep expanding upon that. If we can
That would be my
remember,
hope.
if we can remember half the stuff we were talking about.
Yeah. I our goal is that we would all look like Jesus, and if that's the goal, then it's the only thing that matters, and we'll figure out what that looks like.
Yep. Joey Dearman, we miss you too. Hi, Laura Demian. Hi, Chris Bechtel. Um, for the time being, I'm gonna have to do something a little different here. So we were talking earlier about what's I don't want to say agenda, but what's our goal? What's our end game?
Yeah.
What are with the decisions we're making right now? What's on our horizon? What are our eyes fixed on that we're trying to
Yeah.
get to? Right?
Right. Well, and my feeling is that's never changed. Um, when I became a Christian in 1983, I think, um, I only knew one thing. I wanted to know Jesus. I wanted to know him more, and I wanted to be like him. And I don't know, I can't imagine anything else being a goal in our faith. That doesn't mean we don't have sub goals. I want to be gracious. I want to be kind. I want to be merciful. I want to be wise. I want to grow in maturity and stature. But if we think about it, the composite of all of that together is the person of Jesus. And so
Right.
certainly there are goals to have within the goal. As I grow in wisdom, I want to think more like Jesus and then have the skills of Jesus. As I grow more in grace, I want to be generous with mercy and service, and I want to grow in generosity that way. Certainly each attribute of Jesus is worthy of its own desiring and its own working toward. But ultimately, it's about the character of Christ. Ultimately, it's how can I know him more and look more like him, be more like him, act more like him, let him flow through me more accurately. So,
What
and
do you
that's been
think?
the goal
Go
from the
ahead.
beginning. Go
Sorry,
ahead.
go ahead.
I'm done.
What do you think when you look back on like your faith journey so far?
Mm-hmm.
There's obviously times where you're I mean, we're flawed humans, so there's pockets
Mm-hmm.
of time where your eyes aren't going to be on Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think? Can you talk about what your life looks like? Um, comparative. Sorry, my Alexa is talking to me. What do you think your life looks like when your eyes are looking at Jesus
Mm-hmm.
versus, and this is what I would like to get into tonight too,
Mm-hmm.
not bad, that your eyes are not on bad things other than Jesus, but
Mm-hmm.
on good things other than Jesus. So uh, his blessings or his word or the truths of God or ministry or the things of God, all great things, the things that God has ordained and things that God wants. But
Mm-hmm.
we had talked earlier that there is a difference in the trajectory of our life and the lens we see everything through when our focus is on the things of Christ rather than actually on
Mm-hmm.
Christ.
Well, it's to me, it's not a lot different than having a relationship, having a friendship with somebody, and being more enamored with the benefits of the friendship as opposed to the person themselves. What it is we can derive or get from, or there can be a hollowness, there can be a detachment.
Right.
You can suffer with anxiety. Sometimes we receive the benefits of Christ, but they're meant to be used in conjunction with His Spirit and in as an expression of the character of Him in us.
Yeah.
But when we hold on to them and hoard them, or we think that they're ours, they become a burden in the sense that we're not equipped to keep them. We didn't do anything to get them, really.
Right.
We have them as a beneficiary of the benefactor. Jesus is the person. He's also the benefactor. We're the beneficiary of anything that we receive. But the idea is to have a relationship with Him that is so sound and so rich and so personal that I'm getting up underneath His yoke. I'm yoked with Him. When all of a sudden I find myself trying to, just focusing on those things, the benefits, the yoke gets really heavy. And I look over and I realize that I've either taken my own yoke, right, or I've asked Jesus to remove Himself from the yoke. And all of a sudden I find myself anxious to keep, to hold on to. And it just my relationship becomes wooden, just like with just like I would with anybody else.
Right. Well, I'm gonna transition here. I think that's a good segue. I'm gonna play a song to kind of get us into tonight, and it's a song called "At the Center," and this is a song that I wrote a few years back, and I was in the office at the church, and I was reading an article that none other than Matt Redman had wrote. And he was writing, I think he was writing it for a conference at the time that was focusing on the person of Christ. And there was a line in the article that he mentioned that just said, let all the other names fade away. And it just jumped out at me, and I began to think about the ramifications of a statement like that. And I started thinking, we talk about becoming like Jesus and becoming like Him and doing the thing, and it's like ultimately, I think the Father is trying to get us to become, yes, like Him, but also to be in awe of Him and to be standing in His presence and pursuing Him, not just the stuff that He does or gives. And I really gripped me just thinking about Him at the center of our lives. And someday, like in Revelation, it talks about all these creatures and elders and people kind of around Him and Him in the center being praised. And it's like all is right in the world and in our hearts when He is at the center. It doesn't necessarily mean that everything's perfect and hunky-dory, but it just sits well with my soul, and it feels like I'm at most peace and I feel most healthy when I'm putting Him, not even putting Him in the center, but recognizing that He is. And we're just lining up with the fact that He is in the center already, and we need to revolve around Him. And I think part of our life struggle is that we want to make Him in our image, and we want Him to revolve around us. And He's like, no. And not because He's mean or bad, it's because He knows how good He is. And so I'll play that song, and then we'll keep on talking. There will come a day when all other names will simply fade away, simply fade away. all will be made right. One name left in lights, receiving all the fame, forever and always. And there will come a day when all other names will simply fade away, simply fade away, and all will be made right. One name left in lights, receiving all the fame, forever and always. Jesus at the center as we worship with the angels forever. You are holy, you are worthy of our praises. And we can see it now, creation bowing down before the King of Kings, the Lord of everything, revolving round your throne to worship you alone. The name above all names, the object of all praise. Jesus at the center as we worship with the angels forever. You are holy, you are worthy of our praises. All the glory, all the fame, all the power, all the praise be unto your name. All the glory, all the fame, all the power, all the praise be unto your name. Your name alone, your name alone. Your name alone, your name alone. Jesus at the center as we worship with the angels forever. You are holy, you are worthy of our praises. Jesus at the center as we worship with the angels forever. You are holy, you are worthy of our praises. There will come a day when all other names will simply fade away. There we are.
You know, you're going into the song. We were talking about being the beneficiary of a relationship, being able to enjoy the things of the relationship or what we gain from the person in the relationship versus getting to know the benefactor,
Mm.
getting to know the person. And, the motto or the mission of my ministry since 1985 has been to make people like Jesus. That's been the only goal that I know to have is how do I help you become more like Christ? And it was
When you say
interesting. Say that
yeah,
again.
when you
Go
say
ahead.
that's your goal, what
Mhm.
what would you look back in your life and say, that's when I knew that was my heart.
Uh, well, it was born out of the relationship that he instituted with me. Growing up Catholic, I desperately I love Jesus. That's another conversation. But from the time I was a young person, I mean young, like 10, 9, 10, 11 years old, my heart wanted to know Jesus. And but and I prayed and I sought him and I read the scriptures and before I surrendered my life to him, before I understood what it meant to actually give my life to Christ, I had a dichotomy in me. That Romans 7 battle that rages in. I knew the good things to do, and I saw that it was good, and I wanted to do it, but this
Mm.
evil was right there next to me, and found myself doing the very thing I didn't want to do. And it wasn't until I, met Jesus that literally my life was so utterly transformed and so undone and redone that all I knew was this person Jesus who loved me, apparently loved me where I was, and loved me with such a degree of I don't even know what word to use. Certainly mercy. I can use the words I've learned since then: mercy,
Mm-hmm.
grace, faithfulness. But how I would have described it at 20 years old, not having the Christian words to use, he loved me with such completeness and such thoroughness and with such audacity that I didn't know. It was overwhelming to me. And
Yeah.
and so as I met other evangelicals, and I didn't know another evangelical for 6 months. I was living in San Antonio, away from my family, away from Sherry, who was instrumental in my coming to Christ. Um, but I lived in San Antonio, in Omaha, or San Antonio, and then Omaha by myself for a long time. And so all I had was the scriptures and a bunch of old timey pastors that I would listen to regularly. And I
'Cause
just
you're in the
continued to fall.
military, right? At the time
Right.
you're
Yeah. Yeah. I was
okay.
just out of basic training, went through tech school and then my first station. And, um, all I knew how to do was to read the scriptures and see Jesus and fall in love with him more. And the pastors that I listened to on the radio, the Swindells and the Hendricks and the Jane Verda McGee's and the Warren Wiersbe's and all these wonderful men of God just taught
Mm-hmm.
me how to love Jesus more. And so I didn't know anything else. I really didn't. So by the time I got into youth ministry in 85, and I began to see kids who kind of even though they grew up in the evangelical world, they weren't much different than I was. They heard about Jesus and they seemed to want to have a relationship with Jesus, but they didn't seem to know how to. And my goal was to say, dude, you just need to fall in love with Jesus and then become like him. And I think that's the element you have to be careful with. It wasn't until I think it was, I wish I can remember who said it. I don't remember, it was when I was on staff at my previous church or right after we had planted Mosaic, that I said, my only goal is to make people like Christ. And they looked at me and they said, you mean like him, like to be like him, or to actually like him? And
Yeah,
I said, well, both.
we've joked before. I much more resonate with sorry, my mic's peaking a little bit here. I much more resonate in my heart with the latter, with I want to make people like
Yeah,
Jesus, I
yeah,
want them to
likey
love
likey.
him. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No.
It's much more
Well, it's much more right. It's theologically correct.
well,
So I'll
I think
explain
they
that.
I think they both are. I think it's
Oh,
just
they
your
are.
heartbeat as a teacher
Hmm.
is a transformational,
Yeah.
formational, and
Hmm.
I'm just like um
Let's dance.
emotional
Right. But
artist guy that's like you just got to fall in love with the right person.
yeah. Well, and,
you
and
know.
here's the thing. You can't have one without the other, and you can't put You cannot have, listen, you can love Jesus and never become like him because you don't realize the discipline and the effort that it takes to actually allow your life to be formed and shaped.
Yeah,
Um, or you can try really hard to be like Jesus, but if you don't love him, it becomes wooden and hollow, right?
that's really good.
So the goal is to, Jesus touches our heart, and what he does is he touches us with his love, and
Yeah,
our heart responds to that love, and we turn to him. And so that first contact with Jesus isn't me to him, it's him to me. It's him express. That's why First John, I can say, I love because he first loved me.
yeah,
Right? He touched my heart. I was incapable of coming to him on my own. There was nothing I could do to earn approval, to be accepted. He accepted me by his mercy. He didn't condemn me, and by
yeah.
his grace he extended his hand to me. And when he did that, he touched my heart, and he shared his love with me in such a way that my heart turned and responded to that. Now, the degree of love, as we grow in that love relationship, that actually fuels then the want to be like, if that makes sense. So the
You think?
first act is always an act of love,
Yeah, hopefully.
right? Yeah. I mean, well, we can't come to Jesus unless we see his love for us. That's the first act.
Well,
His love
yes,
expresses
yes.
itself.
Like in
Right.
a legitimate way, you're correct. But
Yeah.
we have encountered a lot of folks, even at Mosaic, who have come from, very, I don't know what the word is, but a background in which uh, created or bred them into something that was very much, we have to be like Jesus, we have to do things that, and then they come to this moment where they're like, I don't know if I love him.
Yeah.
You know what I
Well,
mean? And then
that's
they go,
because, right.
I don't even know if I'm a Christian. I've been
And
doing
part of
all
that,
these things.
well, part of that's because it's performance based. I'm going to show,
Right.
I'm going to prove, I'm going to be like, and so I never want to get that. I never want to turn that upside down,
Yeah.
so for us to understand our relationship with God, we need to first grasp the idea that I stood condemned. So turn to John 3. Everybody turn to John 3 with me. We're going to look at a horrendously familiar text, but in this context, we need to grasp this idea. Not only for ourselves, but if we're going to share our faith, be able to express the hope that we have in Christ to others. So, we need to know the order of things. I don't choose God, he chooses me. Now, he's extending himself to all of mankind. He touches the heart, and the heart that responds to him is the one that can receive. So Jesus or John is writing in First John, or in John chapter 1, he says, listen, he says, Jesus has come into the world, he dwelled among us, and he came to those which were his own. They would not receive him, but to anyone who would receive him, he has given them the right to become children of God.
Now you said John
That's
chapter 3, right?
Yeah, that's back in John chapter 1.
Okay.
So in John chapter 16 or John chapter 3, he begins to tell us what that looks like. So again, it's God extending himself to us. For God so loved the world. He so loved mankind. He so loved the one he made in his image, that was for the purpose of reflecting his image, to establish a love relationship with, a kinship. For God so loved this world, and those he made in his image, and those he made to be objects of his affection, that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever would believe in the Son would not perish, but have eternal life. Now, we all have heard that ad nauseum, and it's unfortunate because it's lost its power sometimes. But what he's saying here is, God is saying, I loved you. I extended myself to you, and I did so by allowing the Word to become flesh. That Jesus, the creator, the maker, the sustainer of life, the one who has made you for the purpose of relationship, was so desperate for that relationship, he was willing to come and walk among you. So that's that so loved. So for God so loved mankind and all of us, he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. Why is that so important? Well, because of the second step. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn it. He didn't. Jesus didn't come to condemn. The idea that Jesus came to condemn and to judge mankind isn't right. He came to save it. Look what it says. It says, for God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him, to offer them, to love them, to extend himself. Well, why is that? Whoever believes in him is not condemned, but whoever does not believe, look what it says here, stands condemned already.
In other words, that we were all in the condition of condemnation. We were all enemies of God, separated from him based on the nature of our heart, which was sin, and sin is always opposed to God. God extends himself. He touches the heart. And the first dance, it's like a bunch of junior hires standing against the wall, and you're waiting for the first dance, and you're hoping somebody will choose you. And what's so awesome about it is Jesus walks in the room, he comes over and he touches your heart. And he says, come dance. And you're like, oh my goodness, the homecoming king wants to dance with me. Right? And you're just like, or the homecoming king, we'll leave it there. And what an astounding thing that this one would choose me, or however you want to look at it. This is what God has done. So when we think about, where were we going with this? Being loved. Oh, so when we think about the order of things, we have to remember that God has established this relationship with us, not for the purpose of performance or getting something done, or even the mission that he's about. We're about the mission because of the love. So when he gives the Great Commission, go and make disciples of all peoples and teach them, what is he saying to them? He's saying, if you love me and you love what I'm about, if you love me, you'll love what I'm about and you'll love what I love. It's about the love first, and then the mission is born out of the love. Jesus came on mission, and his mission was to love and to draw men to himself. He then says, now I'm going to make you a fisher of men. I'm going to build a love relationship with you that's so passionate and so intimate and so transformational. You used that word before. That what is it to be a disciple? Okay, go to Luke. Luke? Yes, go to Luke chapter 14 for a minute.
I think it was it John Piper that said that mission exists because worship doesn't? Meaning we go out to areas. Mission exists. Missionaries go out because there is not the worship of Jesus there.
Right.
And so the goal is to get the worship of Christ, the exaltation of Christ's name. So that's the goal. Mission is not just, it's not a pyramid scheme. It's not just this cyclical thing. It's for the purpose of glorifying Christ. What was the scripture you just said?
Hold on a second. I don't know if I gave you the right one. Are there any questions or comments rolling around before we go any further?
I'm not a good multitasker. That's interesting. If you try to be like him without liking him, it's mockery.
Ooh. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and just a lot of people saying, love y'all.
Okay, so here we go. So go to Luke 14 first.
Feel free to pose questions too.
Yeah, please. Yes. Please do so.
You said Luke.
So go to Luke 14. We're going to go to verse 25, and we're going to talk about this word disciple. So the first move is by God. The word became flesh and he dwelled among us. And then he came to those who were his own. His own would not receive him. So he turned and went to another group. He went to another people. To all who would receive him, he gives them the right to become the children of God. And then he did this. And the reason he did it is explained in John chapter 3, because God so loved the world that remember, Jesus is God. And so that triune God is of one purpose, one mind, one mission, one spirit, right? One love. And so it wasn't like the Father coerced the Son or forced the Son to do something the Son didn't want to do, or only what the Father wanted done. They were in agreement with one another, and their love is so deep and so rich that their yes is yes together. They can't, there's no contradiction. And that's what God wants to do in us. He wants to develop us in such a way, love us in such a way as to draw our love to him, and then work with us in the building of this relationship, that our likeness comes from the love relationship, not only from the effort to, I see that about him, I want to be like that. I'll become like that more and more as I get to know him. The skills come as I walk with him, and he shows me the skill, right? So
I have a question before we go.
Mm-hmm.
Two questions. Is it Luke 14:25 you said?
14:25.
Okay. The other question is, it seems to be that all people have different capacity levels for intimacy and relationship and connection.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that is true for our interaction with Jesus, or is that because it seems to be that I know folks who are incredibly in tune with their selves and others, and that it tends to bleed into their relationship with Christ, where they seem to be very in tune in that way. And then I know other folks who are a little more disconnected socially, disconnected relationally, and that tends to.
Well,
so that's an interesting hurdle.
I think there's truth in that, but I also think that. So I think that's like a what came first, the chicken or the egg kind of thing, right? I tend to be able to relate more to people, and I'm more open to them, and I make myself more vulnerable to them. Or I'm able to handle gently their vulnerability more when I've practiced that with Jesus first. In other words, you know what I mean? So as I've learned to allow myself to be vulnerable before God and allow him to touch my heart and mind reaching for his, in that relationship, he's showing me gentleness. He's showing me kindness. He's showing me goodness. He's loving me. He's admonishing me. He's correcting me. And he's doing it in a way that is always for my benefit.
Right.
When I learn that from him, I now gain confidence in my own person, so that now when I turn to somebody else, I'm not afraid of being overwhelmed by that or enveloped by that person, or I've been taught how to now be gentle and be kind and how to have a listening ear.
Right. No, that's a good point. Like that the barriers that we may put up through our own insecurities or wounds or just lack of ability, Jesus has a way of wooing and healing and helping us put those guards down, not to for the sake of letting people, opening yourself up to things you don't need to, but like in the love believes all things, love trusts, and love gives the benefit of the doubt. I think Jesus has a way of sort of melding our hearts in that way, and then it does, like you said, it starts with him, but then bleeds into those around us.
Right. And as we grow with him, if we here's the thing, just like any other relationship, we have to put the effort into growing and cultivating that relationship. Right. In the growing and cultivating of the relation. Listen, you and I have known each other for years, in our, in our discipleship lives, where there have been areas in your life as an older man, I've come beside you and walked with you. I've earned the right to speak to you, not because I do things right, but because I love you. Right. And you've come to trust me. And as we do life together, all of a sudden we'll start talking about skills. Or we'll notice in something in each other that we want to know, how did you do that? Or why? What were you thinking when you did that? That happens as an outgrowth of the relationship that we've cultivated over years. Well, it's no different with Jesus. And I guess there's one thing, if I could flip a switch in everybody's mind and their thinking in regard to how to grow in Christ, it's that right there. That it is not complicated. It takes effort, but it's not complicated. It's no different than any other good, cultivated relationship. There are ebbs and flows, there's stops and goes, there's arguments, and there's laughter and crying. Everything that occurs between two close people happens between us and Jesus. He's given us each other to practice tangibly what he wants from us with him. And then as we practice it with him, it makes us better with each other. Right. It's a wonderful push and pull.
Right. Yeah, not to go off on a whole other tangent, but like you've said, sometimes folks think that God sent Jesus to adapt to us, to understand. So we,
right.
That's because it's almost like the chicken or the egg thing, and we're saying, yeah, it was us. We started first. Yeah. And that, he says, Jesus is the groom. He's coming back for his bride. And we're like, well, he says that because we have married. And it's like, no. He was in love with his bride way before we had marriage on earth. He gave us marriage on earth because that's how his heart works. That's how his heart beats. And so it always, we get kind of confused. I mean, I do the same thing, but we always have to remember he is the first and the last. He's the beginning and the end.
Yeah. Before we go any further, make sure there aren't any comments or questions that we need to address before we go.
Just some amens and so trues and maybe a whole other tangent, but 12 disciples. Why did he pick Judas?
Well, he says plainly in John that so that the scriptures would be fulfilled.
Yeah. Why did he pick me?
Right.
I mean,
Jesus extends his grace to all mankind in a very, at least in a very general way. And so, even Romans, it says, is in a general sense that God's invisible qualities everything that his power is, is evidenced by what has been made. So Jesus extended himself to Judas. Judas's heart was set, and the relationship ends up accomplishing the prophecies.
Yes.
I'm sure it's more complicated than that, but that's a cursory.
I call it the mystery soup.
Right.
It's like Jesus has recipes and we don't quite get it, but he's able to make stuff. But the ingredients are super mysterious.
Yep.
How do we have...
And beyond us. We don't really want to know how the sausage is made sometimes.
I know.
It tastes great, but you don't want to be in the kitchen.
Foreknowledge, free will, all that,
right.
Crazy.
Yep.
So Dan asked this. He said, going back to the idea that we send missionaries where worship does not exist, how do you minister when your audience is filled with both unbelievers and believers? I guess the question could be, how do you exercise getting people to like Jesus while getting people to be like Jesus?
All right. So this takes us right to Luke 14. Dan has this way of segueing us right into the text we're looking for. So we're in Luke 14.
And we're going to look at segue too. Those are
sweet. That's right. Yeah. I'd probably
Dan
break
Jones,
my arm.
Mall cop.
I would fall down. All right. You ready? So we're in Luke 14, verse 25. It says, now great crowds were traveling with Jesus. So he turned to them and said, now great crowds were traveling. Now they had, listen, they had seen him perform miracles. Some of them had experienced that. They had heard him teach. They saw how he treated people. Some of them may have seen him or been part of crowds that he had fed. And so he's saying to the crowd, he's saying they're traveling with him. They're astonished. So he turns to them and he says, listen, if anyone comes after me, if anyone is really genuinely seeking me, sincerely following, and does not hate his own father and mother, his wife and his children, his brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be look what the next word, he can't be my disciple. Now, what he's saying is, obviously, he calls us to love our children and honor, and to love and respect and honor our spouse and to honor our parents. So he is not literally meaning hate in the sense that he wants us to loathe them. He's saying your love and devotion to me should be so great that any other affection should appear like hate in comparison. What I'm looking for from you is the full measure of your heart, the sincerity of your affection, the devotion of your life. That's what he wants for his disciple. So what is a disciple? A disciple is one who walks with, does life with, learns to love, and at the same time gains the skills of the one from whom they're learning. That's what a disciple is. So he loved his disciples. He called them his own. He called them friends. He loved them. In fact, and we just looked at, on Maundy Thursday, we looked at the passage where he washed the disciples' feet. It says he got up from the meal. He was eager to eat this meal with his friends. He got up from the meal. He took off his outer jacket. He put on a towel, and he says he showed them the extent of his love. He loved them to the end. He demonstrated his love as the teacher, as the disciple maker, as the one who was skilled in all things love. He said to his disciples, I'm going to show you one more time, one grand culmination. Everything I've done, everything you've seen me do, everything you've done with me, I'm going to show you in this one act. And he washed their feet. He showed them the extent of his love. So what he's looking at doing then is saying, any disciple becomes like their teacher. So now we go to Matthew. Go to Matthew 10, if you would. We're going to look at verse 24.
Give me just a moment.
Mm-hmm.
Matthew 10:24.
10:24.
Anytime you say anything, I just put the whole chapter because you.
That's all right.
I'm like, that way it gives me.
Well, this one is a principle I'm going to pull out, so I'm not going to read it in context necessarily, because what I want to look at is the definition of disciple as Jesus states it.
All right, go for it.
Okay, verse 24 says, a disciple is not above his teacher, a slave above his master. Verse 25. Can you go on to the next verse?
Yep.
It is not enough for a disciple to become like his teacher. In other words, the whole goal of this process is that they become like the one they follow, and that their character reflects the one they follow. He goes on to actually talk about Satan and his disciples. What Jesus is saying, you will all resemble the teacher who you cling to, the one to whom you are devoted, the one you build a love relationship with. You will become like them. This is a really, really important principle. So the idea in making people like Jesus is now, so I'll go to Dan's question. How do you minister in a place where there's believers and unbelievers? Well, what did Jesus say? He said, you'll know, the world, will know that you, my disciples, are my disciples by what? By your works? By your service? By your performance? No, by how you love one another. So when you're in a community where it's mingled between believers and unbelievers, the thing that is most pronounced in regard to the world being able to see whose disciples we are is that we love each other the way Jesus loved us. That's what, now when it says in John 13, it says that I'm going to show you the extent of my love. He washes their feet. What does he say after he washes his feet? He sits down at the table. He says, listen, what you have seen me do, your teacher has become the servant. Now you do. What you've seen me do, now you do to one another. And he goes on to say then, and the people around you will know you're my disciples by how you love. Your love for one another is a demonstration of the love I came and touched you with. What you've learned walking with me, the love relationship we've built amongst us. So when and then are we loving Jesus in such a way as to express that love in a very real way, not only then to one another, but that it spills onto those people who don't know Jesus. So if we go to Matthew 5, which I wasn't intending to do, but let's go to Matthew 5 for a minute. Matthew 5. It ain't no jive when you go to Matthew 5.
Hey, before we move in there, Andrew Rick said a question. He said, he showed the extent of his love. Does the disciple then not emulate that to his family? So I'm thinking that's in reference to, hating brother, sister, father, mother. Andrew, you can clarify on there if I'm wrong. But.
Well, if he's saying that, yeah. Let him clarify. Andrew, I'd love to hear a little bit more of a clarification there. I want to make sure. In the meantime, I'm going to go to Matthew 5, verse 43.
I'm in 5.
And this is to go ahead and finish Dan's question. And really, it fits perfectly with what we intended to do today. And that is, how do we, what is the end goal? What's the end goal of our faith? To love God, to be loved by God, to love God, to be conformed to the likeness of Christ through that love relationship, and then to bring others to that truth, to that person. It's like, Andrew running and getting Peter and saying, we found him, we found the Messiah, come and see, right? So we're in verse 43, ready?
Yes.
So it says this, you've heard said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I tell you, love your enemies. How do we minister to people who are not believers? We love them. We pray for them, even if they're opposed to us. We rejoice that the sun shines on even the evil, and that God would send rain even on the unrighteous. We would treat them with kindness and honesty and grace, and recognizing their brokenness and not blaming them, but knowing that their actions, their behaviors, their attitudes, their lostness it's a reflection of the condition of their heart and the place that they reside. So if Christians aren't cultivating a love relationship with Jesus, our lives don't look much different than they used to. He loves us. When I turn and I love him and I spend time with him, I can't help but become like him. So, going back to your statement before in terms of wanting people to have you want to make people like and love Jesus. Well, that's what it is. That's the whole gig.
Yeah.
That is the whole gig. Listen, what makes a marriage excellent? Isn't it that you grow in love, and out of that love you begin to treat your spouse with the type of treatment that they deserve? In the meantime, you're learning skills, but they're, because you're loving them, you're wanting to grow in those skills, and you're letting them teach you how to love them, and you're figuring out new ways to love them. And when you're confronted with the fact you haven't been loving them well, even though you thought you might have, you may be hurt at first, but then you want to repair that.
I'm really fascinated by your correlation there between, I think how you put that. It made me think about, so if you have, if your goal, if your end goal is to be like Jesus, but you do not like or love Jesus with your heart, it's really just legalism. It's empty, hollow, sort of Pharisee stuff. But if your goal is to love Jesus and you just like him and he's the coolest dude ever, but you have no desire to be like him, it's kind of the dark side of grace. You know what I mean? Because I think grace and Jesus is both full of grace and truth. And I think that's what that was kind of neat. I never correlated those two types of philosophies with grace, 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 and truth, 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 because it tends to be the truth folks that are all about being like Jesus and look like Jesus and do the things that Jesus, but sometimes there can be lacking love. And the grace folks are all about love, 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 but sometimes, and I've fallen into that before too, sometimes you're not locked into the truth. You can believe funny things and be blown by the wind, but you want to love everybody. You know, that's a really interesting correlation there. That being like him, and yeah, that's because your heartbeat is right about the same as mine, but we just have a little nuance there. And I think it's that truth and grace balance that we jump back and forth in between. But I think you need both.
Yeah. Oh,
you know
absolutely.
what I mean? It's a marriage or whatever.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. It's
I
like
don't know if that makes sense.
Sure, it's like passion and discipline, right?
Right.
I'm passionate about my wife, but if I'm not disciplined about, developing my character to be able to sustain our relationship, that passion's not going to take us very far. In fact, passion all of a sudden will ring very hollow. If, in fact, well, let's do this. You have a question?
I'm just checking them.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're good.
Okay, we're going to go to another super. Well, this part's not familiar. Go to 1 Corinthians 13. We're going to look at this idea of love and truth, and passion and discipline. And we think about, unfortunately, again, this is a scripture we've tended to relegate to weddings, and isn't it a nice poem? And we put it on placards, and we go, oh, isn't that a nice platitude? When in fact, it's probably the most brutal. I think it's one of the most brutal, instructive, and admonitional passages in the entire Bible. I think it's extremely difficult. And what we see in the first 3 verses, which we don't spend a lot of time in, is we see the imbalance of truth and passion, right? If I speak in the tongues of men and angels, but do not have love. In other words, and I speak all these, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. So I could have the very power and the very majesty of an angelic being in regard to the manner in which I speak. But if I don't love, I'm a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. Kind of esoteric.
Are you in
Verse
5?
2. No, 1 Corinthians 13.
Why did that?
Oh, because I was going to go to John. No, that was, I don't know, 5.
I don't know what happened there. It just popped up. Sorry.
That's okay.
I put 1 Corinthians in. It went to 5 for some reason.
You ready?
Go ahead. Yeah.
So if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels and do not have love, I'm a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. It doesn't matter how majestic my voice is. It doesn't matter what power I appear to arrive with. When it speaks of the angels sitting on the stone of Jesus' tomb, it says that the soldiers fell as dead and the women were terrified. Well, why? They were angels. They were angelic beings. And I can have that same thing. But if I don't have love, I'm just a gong or a cymbal. I become offensive to the senses. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries, and I have all knowledge, in other words, I'm brilliant. I have the words of God, and my theology is sound, and everything is good. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries, and I have all knowledge, and if I have faith that can move mountains, but I don't have love, I am nothing. Then you have now you have the compassion group. So first you have the power group, then you have the truth group, and now you have the compassion group. Look what it says. If I give all I possess to the poor and give my body over for hardship that I may boast. In other words, I have such compassion. I'm so desperate to serve, and I'm missional, and I want to go touch lives, but I do not have love. I gain nothing. Those three things have to be interwoven, and they have to be the authenticity of it, the effectiveness of it, the ability for it to actually speak to one another and then speak to the lost world is love.
Bro, that's so good. I've never seen it like that.
And then he tells us how brutal love is, and we can go there another time.
I'm using this from now on. It's totally true. Speaking to tongues of men or angels, boom. Yes, I'm like, I'm envisioning. I've been in that party. I've been in the second party. I've been in all three of these parties at different times in my life.
Yep. Well, and the thing is this: all of those are good things. All of these are good things. Now, if you're taking notes at home and you want to read Jesus' warning to the church that is gifted this way, read the Revelation 3 and the letter to Laodicea. Or Revelation 2 and the letter to the church in Ephesus. Or 1st and 2nd Corinthians, which is this right in the center of it. These are all good things. These are all benefits. These are all benefits of knowing the King. But if you don't have love, it means you are far from your heart is. It's like when Jesus would say, "Listen, your lips, yep, they're talking to me, but your heart is far from me." Yeah, not everyone who says, "Lord, Lord," will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only those who do the will of the Father. Well, I did this. I performed miracles, and I drove out demons, and I did all these things in your name. I prophesied. What did he say? Well, I never knew you. Your heart was far from me. Performance isn't what I'm looking for, bub. I'm looking for a sincere heart. So at this time, this leads us. Now, are there any questions or comments coming in that we need to address?
Yeah, I'm scrolling through them here. Patty, that's cool. Patty Green said, "That's exactly how I came to realize things. I was so legalistic until I had the slow and steady of the love and respect and cultivation of a respectful relationship with just a handful of those at Mosaic first. That brought trust." Dan Schoonover said, "Sometimes we need to learn love like we are children, totally innocent and not expecting anything in return." Dan Jones, "The hollowness of a walk with Christ comes from loving the idea of Jesus, but it lacks the relationship with Jesus. It sets Jesus up as an idol. We must walk within the relationship, loving who he is and what he has done, understanding that he is real, understanding that he loves me and that he wants to hang with me and do life with me." Now that's a really interesting...
Who said that?
Dan Jones.
Uh-huh.
That's a really interesting thought, though. Like, I've wrestled with that myself. Like, are we meant to have idols at all? Like, is Jesus meant to be our idol? Or is the idea of an idol that thing in your heart that you place that way? Is there actually a place there that nothing's supposed to be because it's an unhealthy place of the heart, an idolization? I do know that we're always searching for Jesus, when we're doing those things, we're looking for something to fill that, and he's the only one that satiates it. But the question is, can he become an idol, which is really intriguing to me.
Well, I will say this: attributes of God can become idols.
Right.
Right. So if we
right.
don't understand that God is fully orbed and every one of his attributes is beautifully governed by every other attribute, but there's an attribute that for us, for whatever reason, we pull out and we say this is God at the exclusion of the other attributes, we have made it an idol.
Yeah.
Grace becomes an idol. You talked about, there are all kinds of camps in Christianity, and there's the compassion camp and the grace camp and the truth camp, and the camp after camp after camp, and those camps aren't bad in and of themselves, but the key is to remain balanced. How do we remain in love and recognizing the grace of God and the justice of God and the love of God and the discipline of God, and all those things are beautifully governed. And the minute we pull one attribute out and say, now this is God, we've made that an idol.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know how that reflects on the person of Jesus, but what I want to be able to do, Peter asks a good question here, and it's about 1 Corinthians, or makes a statement. And I want to because closing this out, we can address what he's saying here. And I want to figure out how we can get this thread back in place. So we've come through the idea of what is the end goal. The end goal is, having been loved by Jesus, that we love him back. And in loving him then and becoming his disciple, we learn the skills walking with him to be like him, right? So love, and he loved us first. Our love of him is in response to his incredible love. That where I was broken and dark and death, and he shed a light in there and showed me mercy and called me to himself when I was still his enemy. And by grace, he extends his heart to me, and he says, not only do I want to love you, I want to give you life. And if you'll come to me, you'll have life, and life eternal. That is the interaction, and that's the order in which it happens. The love relationship from this point forward is now him continuing to extend himself to me. Every time my love will always fall short, he will always come and get me where my love falls short, and draws me back into himself to prove his love to me, to make my love grow for him.
Yeah.
Go to John 21, and we're going to see the perfect example of this. And then I'm going to finish with what Peter was asking. I hope this is making sense. But golly, just loving Jesus, there's nothing in the world that compares.
I think it's totally making sense. I will say, I want to clarify, I don't want anyone to think that, I don't want people to be paranoid that Jesus, they could love Jesus too much and he becomes an idol.
Right.
I think it's when you love the things of him,
or an attribute of him.
Attribute of him, or the idea of some part of him. But I think you can put all your stock in Jesus, all your worship, all your adoration, all your obsession, all your addiction. I think you can throw it all right at him, and I think he receives it, and I think he doesn't buckle under it, and we don't get crushed under it. It's the perfect.
Yep. Well, it's what we've been designed for. That is what we have been designed for.
Right.
So I want to go to that point too. There are attributes, because I want to make sure we understand something. When we take an attribute of God and we decide it is God to the exclusion of all other or most other or any other attribute, now we've made it an idol. That doesn't mean that attributes of Jesus don't appeal to us more, and attributes of Jesus don't mean more to us at certain times in our lives. When I have sinned and I'm broken, you know what I need more than anything from Jesus? His mercy. And his mercy is going to stand out to me. Then his grace is going to stand out to me. His mercy is that I didn't get punished for what I just did. His grace is that he loves me and he receives me. And then his restoring power brings me back into the relationship. All three of those attributes are essential. They're going to stand out to me in those moments. What I have to be careful to do is not take that attribute, love it so much that I believe other attributes are actually opposed to it, as opposed to balanced to it. And all of a sudden, I am at risk of making that an idol. So I want to make sure that's very, very clear. So if anybody has any question or comment about that, type it in now, because I want to address that. What I'd like to do is go to John 21. We're going to talk about that mercy, grace, God loving us, drawing us back into the relationship in his restorative power, and what it is he's trying to restore us to.
What verse you want?
We're going to start at verse 15. Now this is, Matt's getting that ready. This is after Jesus has been resurrected, he has met with the disciples, and Peter now has been fishing with his buddies because he's struggling, and Jesus calls Peter to himself and begins to restore him. And I want us to see what he does to restore Peter here. It says, when they had finished eating, Jesus asked Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Do you love me?" We need to let that hang there for a minute. What Jesus was doing was giving Peter an opportunity to express his affection, to be able to get over the hump, get over the awkwardness of having denied him and having broken his heart, and having the shame and the embarrassment and the awkwardness of not knowing where I stand. And Jesus says to him, "Listen, do you love me?" What does Peter say? He says, "Well, yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Then Jesus speaks of the mission. Love what I love. Feed my lambs. I'm going to restore you to me first. Then I'll restore you to the work. Because the work is in my love relationship with you. It's not in somehow earning your way back to me. Jesus never said to Peter, "I'm going to reinstate you as disciple, apostle, and missionary, and then we'll talk about love." No, he said, "I love you, and I need to know you love me. And the outgrowth of that will be you love what I love, and you will have the privilege of feeding my lambs." That is so true for us. When we sin, when we fall short, when we are feeling awkward with God because we know we have not, for whatever reason, lived up to whatever we think we should have lived up to, Jesus at that moment again touches our heart first. He extends his hand to us. He says, "Sweetie, listen to me. Do you love me?" "Well, Jesus, of course, you know I love you." "Then come walk with me." And he does this with Simon 3 times. 3 times. And the restoration to love all 3 times comes before the restoration to ministry. Because the ministry, anything we do to minister the kingdom of heaven and the gospel to the lives of anyone else, is an expression of the love relationship that is always ebbing and flowing, that is always needing to be repaired. It's no different than any other relationship. Matt, how many arguments have you and I had over the years? We've been together 10, 11 years, right?
Yeah, we've probably had enough.
Right? At least disagreements, or not being pleased with how the other one has behaved or acted or said something. It happens when you work together for 10 years.
You know, the scariest thing, and I hope this doesn't offend anybody, but the scariest thing anybody can say to me in any relationship, whether it's a best friend, a spouse, whatever, they say, "We're so close, we've never had one argument."
Oh.
When I hear that, a million things roll through my head. Uh-huh. And I've said this, and you could ask my wife, what does Matt always say? My big catchphrase in the house is conflict breeds intimacy. And that's what we live by here. Not being a jerk and being argumentative and just, no. But healthy conflict builds and breeds intimacy. It's like the age-old thing about the soldiers in the bunker. You know, who's bonding more? The guys that are getting bombed and they're holding on to each other for dear life, or the dudes back in the office, you know, printing out paper reports? The dudes that are almost getting killed, you know? That conflict builds camaraderie. It builds brotherhood.
Well, conflict means you're both being honest.
Right.
Conflict happens when something has happened enough times where both of you are like, "That's enough. I've had it up to here.
Right.
Now we're going to talk this through," you know?
Speaking the truth in love.
Love. So, which is a beautiful segue to finish this thing up, and Peter's comment on 1 Corinthians 13. Now, I want to go back to what Peter said, because I don't want to miss. I think what he was talking about was this apostolic love. Let me see. And we're running out of time, so I don't want to keep everybody. So, guys, I appreciate your being patient. I'm just going to have to take a stab at it because I can't find it, and there's enough going on that it's just a scrolling. So, but what does love look like then? What are the nuts and bolts of love? What are the things that Jesus is with us that we might be with others?
Are you looking for he said, "Lord, you know all things, you know I love you." And he said, "I tell you when you were younger." That part?
Nope. We're in 1 Corinthians 13, verse 4. And what Peter was saying before was, as we were talking about this, he says, this type of love it can be missing among us. Love is patient, and love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. All of these love, we talked about the heart of love, and we talked about the passion of love, and we talked about, the fact that I love you, yay. But the rudimentary disciplines of love, the thing that actually expresses love, are these things. This is the discipline side. Love is patient. And we know the patience isn't necessary if there isn't conflict. Patience, you only need to be patient when something isn't going well. When your love is being tested, you need to be patient. And love isn't love until it's tested. And so love will be tested. You have to be patient in the test. And then you have to act kindly while you're being patient. And it just goes on from there. And these are the disciplines of love. These are the skills we learn from Jesus, because you know what he's had to be with me? He's had to be really patient. And when I'm afraid to admit to him that I've done something wrong and actually let him touch my heart in that area, and I'm terrified, you know what he's been? Kind. He's been kind. And the only time the Spirit envies is when I've given my affection to somebody else. That's the only time the Spirit envies. So love does envy in that regard, but what it doesn't do is it doesn't envy to the point of hating you for having something that it doesn't have. So, it's this idea of becoming like Christ, and that our lives, that my deepest desire would be that I would look like Jesus. It ought to drive me then to cultivate my love relationship with him and hear him say to me, Anthony, do you love me? Do you love me? Then do what I do. Do you love me? Then love who I love. Do you love me? Then join me in the work. Don't give me your heart, give me your devotion, give me your life. And the better I love Jesus, the better I love my wife, the better I love my children, the better I love my grandchildren, the better I love my church.
That's true.
Because he teaches me how. He shows me. Just being with him makes me more like him. So,
Tony, we probably should wrap up.
mm-hmm.
Would you mind just reading through? That's just such a beautiful passage, and I know it's become cliche because every wedding uses it, but I just think it'd be worthwhile reading through that 1 Corinthians famous love passage, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, we can use this as the closing prayer if we want.
Yeah. You want to just start at 1?
Yeah.
Okay.
If I speak in tongues of men and of angels, but do not have love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to the flames, to hardship, that I might boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. See, love looks like this. It's patient. And love is kind. So patient bears up. It walks beside. It lingers. Love is kind. It's gentle. It's humble. It's gracious. It gives the benefit of the doubt. It understands there's a reason, not just an excuse. It realizes the brokenness of the heart before it, and it treats it tenderly. It doesn't envy. It doesn't want what everyone else wants. It doesn't desire to steal and covet from someone. It certainly doesn't boast. It doesn't compare itself to something else in a haughty way or look down on others. And in so, it's not proud. Love isn't proud. Love doesn't put itself above others. It doesn't beat its own chest. It does not dishonor others, but it protects their dignity. It wraps itself around them. It covers the sinner and loves them sincerely that they might recover. It is not self-seeking. It doesn't just look for the benefits of the relationship. It doesn't look just to get what it can get. And then so it's not easily angered when it doesn't get what it was hoping for, doesn't get what it expected, doesn't get what they think they should have, when their rights somehow have been trampled. And in that, it keeps no record of wrongs. It realizes that people make mistakes, and hurt people, and broken people break others. See, love doesn't delight in evil and what puts people in peril, but it rejoices with the truth and the life that truth brings. It always protects. It always trusts. It always hopes with eager expectation. And love does not fail. It always perseveres. See, love never fails, but where there are prophecies, there will cease. Well, why? Because we'll see God, and we won't need to have predictions and looking forward to things, because we'll have him. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. So knowing all my doctrine and my jot and tittle are fine and good and help me govern, but eventually it will go away. It will pale in comparison. It will pale. It will just dissipate in the face of seeing Jesus. And we're going to see that now. For we know in part and we prophesy in part. But when completeness comes, when the fullness of Jesus arrives, all this stuff that's part disappears. See, when I was a child, I talked like a child, and I thought like a child, and I reasoned like a child. I was immature. I was incomplete. I was a little naive, maybe spoke more than I should have, or thought I knew more than I actually do. But when I became a man, when I became mature and complete, I put the ways of childhood behind me. I realize I need to learn more. I don't know everything I think I do, and I have a long way to go. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror, wavy and blurry, and at least the semblance of, but not the fullness of. But then when Jesus comes, we shall see face to face, clear, crystal clear. See, now I know in part, but then now I know in part, but then I shall know fully, even as I'm fully known. In other words, I will know everything there is to know, because I know now that I'm fully known by God and I see him face to face. So these three things remain: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. Amen.
Yeah, it's beautiful and convicting.
Amen. Peter, thank you for making us go back there, my friend.
Thank you, everybody, for engaging so much tonight. We had so many wonderful comments. I mean, we're not even able to get to them all, which is an awesome problem to have. Thank you guys so much, and thank you, Tony, for sharing.
Well, love you all. Have a wonderful night.
Love you, Mosaic.
See you guys.
Lord willing, we will see you soon. We love you guys. Bye-bye.